Hi, I'm Jody, and I'm an Agile coach. And the topic of today's video is capacity planning. We all know the standard definition of capacity. It's the ability to hold or contain. But in Agile, it's a little different. We want to look at the available amount of time that we have to develop stories. It's a crucial piece to the Agile methodology. Without this ability, how do our teams determine how much work they can take on in any given sprint? So it's worth taking a look at how do we formulate our capacity and what's the logic behind it. This room has a seating capacity of 9, but we need a table to be able to do our work. But when we bring in the table, it reduces our seating capacity. Tables are a lot like meetings at work. They're necessary, but they take up space. Let's start with our base number. A 2-week sprint is made up of 10 working days, 8 hours a day. That gives us 80 hours of work time. But work time isn't necessarily development time. As you can see, George isn't pleased about being asked to develop 80 hours worth of stories without the available time. And that's fair not to want that. So let's look at all the activities that happen in a sprint that are consistent that we know take away time from developing stories. We have our Scrum events. Those typically take around 5.5 hours to 9 hours for a 2-week sprint. We also can't forget about things like lunch or breaks or non-recurring meetings. So we estimate for a typical sprint, we spend about 20% of our time on these activities. So we don't want to factor that 20% in to our available development time. Our starting point now becomes 8 days instead of 10 days for a 2-week sprint. We also have to take a look at our utilization rate. No matter how good we aren't computers. Case studies have shown that Scrum teams normally operate around a 70% utilization rate. So the main reason for that is that people need time to switch tasks. Even though we say we multitask, in actuality, we do something called a fast switch. Basically, what that says is that people need a little bit of time to get acclimated every time they start a new task. So every time we multitask or task switch, we're using a little bit of time. Apply that idea to every time you come back from a meeting or every time you're interrupted, that adds up. Utilization rate also covers when we have to think through a problem, which is going to happen. So when we say 70% utilization rate, that doesn't imply we're not working for the other 30%. We just want to account for it because we know it's going to happen. So let's start putting this all together. We start with 80 hours for a 2-week sprint. We subtract 20%. That gives us a new starting point of 8 days to develop our stories. But we also want to apply our utilization rate. So since we know we have 64 hours of available development time, we're going to multiply that by the 70% utilization rate. That gives us our estimation of having 44.8 hours dedicated to developing stories during a 2-week sprint. For capacity planning, we want it easy and not necessarily specific to the day. So what we'll do is take our 44.8 hours and divide that by 8 working days. And that tells us we have around 5.6 hours available on a typical day to work on stories. So if we estimate a 1-point story point to be about a half day, we now have a really easy way to estimate our capacity. 1 story point equals 1 day. So when we go to determine capacity, it really comes down to 4 easy steps. Keep in mind, our formula for identifying capacity is based on available development time. So only full-time Agile members that work on development should receive 8 points for a 2-week sprint. Any part-time developers, that 8 points should be adjusted. Second step, any team member that will be gone for PTO or holiday, have them subtract 1 point for every day they're gone. Step 3, when you estimate your story points, find something that's going to be about a half a day, and that becomes your 1-point story. Last step, estimate the rest of your stories relative to that 1-point story point. And that's the logic behind capacity planning. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.